This week on Kill Phil, Ryan from Cross Counter Live asked Jesse from Nascent Perspective Studios to build the EE3 carbine rifle, better known as the BOBA FETT blaster.
It looks like it's handmade, even in the Star Wars universe. That's one of the things I like about the gun.
It actually looks really cowboy when you look at it.
It really kind of does. Yeah, it has a very kind of Wild West feel to it. It seems pretty straightforward. This is just like a regular, 357 revolver. I actually have a 357 snub nose airsoft gun that I can use. Probably like a BB gun scope. The rest of it just seems to be PVC pipes, some model kit parts. Most of this can be, again, kind of found at a hardware store, local hobby shops and stuff like that. So it should be a pretty straightforward build.
Okay, let you get to it.
Thanks, Dave.
See you later.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks.
3 days?
3 days.
Awesome.
See you in a couple days.
Okay.
So what I've done so far is I went online and downloaded the nicest picture I could find of Boba's blaster. I basically scaled it off a picture of Boba Fett. I'm about 6'6". He seems to be about 6'6" as well, a pretty tall guy. So I measured here to here, based off the size of my 357 snub nose. You see here what I've done is made a template, scaled it up from there, glued it down to Sintra, and cut it on a bandsaw. This is just Sintra plastic, it's just expanded PVC, same as this, but just kind of in a different shape. You can kind of see here, I didn't actually have Sintra that was thick enough to actually make the piece. I took 6 pieces, put them all together, with my centerpiece coming through the middle of it, so looks like all one piece. From there, took apart the handle, cut everything off of it and mounted it to my base. From there, cut down my PVC pipe. PVC is great to work with because you can drill into it, you can sand it, you can paint it. There's a lot of off-the-shelf items, fittings, tubes, all that stuff that make for interesting shapes. I'm gonna lock this whole thing together in here, and then from here kind of go back into kit bashing and put together all the parts, come back in, retrofit the handle. Here, I managed to find a cheap BB gun scope that goes right here. The inside piece here, I think I'm probably just gonna make either out of plastic or balsa wood and just shape it by hand, sand it, bond to it, make it look nice. Right here on the stock, there's a couple of interesting parts which were probably found out of like some kit back in the 70s when they actually made the gun. I had a friend of mine, Ezra Hamill, he put these together for me real quick. So what I'm gonna do now is just build a mold wall around these and do a quick blanket mold. So this, what I have here is just basically foam core. Just cut it in half. Quick, easy way to build a box. I use CA glue, super glue, cyanoacrylate glue for most of my stuff. They make a kicker, which actually makes it go off really fast. Super glue dries in a few seconds. Anytime I'm making a mold, I like to just use foam core just for a little quick and dirty mold, because you can just cut it with a razor knife, put a little CA glue on it to hold it in place, and then seal it in place with some hot glue, which will keep the silicone from leaking out the bottom. So after I built one box, I repeat the process, go over here, then I just dry my mold release a little bit, keep it from getting oily. The mold material I use is a pretty standard silicone mold rubber. There's dozens of different brands out there. It's a 10-to-1 mix, 10 parts base to 1 part catalyst. Anytime you're mixing silicone, you want to mix it slow. Try not to mix air bubbles into it. The more air bubbles you have in the rubber, the more likely you're to have air bubbles in your finished mold. Try to keep air out of the mix. Just tapping on the table to bring some of the air bubbles to the surface. I'm going to go ahead and start pouring it in. I start doing a really small stream of it. That way the air bubbles will pop more on the surface and move over to the other one. Makes it easier for the air bubbles to escape. Once you do a small layer like that, a lot of times when I pour the molds, I'll use a little bit of compressed air just to really kind of blow into the mold. It really kind of spreads it out, forces it into the details and exposes around the edge where a cast piece meets the board. Most silicone materials, you want to let it dry for 12 to 16 hours. In this case, we can cast something, let it sit overnight, demold it the next morning. On the front of the Boba Fett gun, there's like this kind of reduced cone looking thing, which actually looks like just a regular oil change or a paint funnel. So all I did was mark my line, cut off my edges, and then glue it into place. Once I put the cone on, I had a little bit of issue of it popping off because there's very little surface area of the cone making contact. So I rounded the edges off, added a little bit more glue in there, and made sure I glued from the inside as well to create a little bit of a bridge to gap it in. Basically what I can do is, once I get it glued on and have a good fit, I can actually sand the cone down to the size of the PVC pipe as opposed to trying to cut it to the exact size. When you're sanding stuff, you want to take off more, you use a lower grit, so then you start working your way up through your grits, getting in finer and finer grits until you get to the point where it's smooth enough that you can just paint right over it. These little spines right here look like basically like plastic tees. I managed to find these giant I-beams. They're about 3/4 of an inch from a hobby shop for model building, model train building, things like that. And actually split them in half on the table saws. Each of those tees we flipped around, spaced them out, and put them on the barrel itself, which gave us that kind of ridge look. Bondo is actually a polyester resin, same as like fiberglass resin, but it actually has a filler in it. Bondo is great because it gets kind of like a doughy consistency. You can sculpt it, you can shape it, and of course the harder it gets, you can sand it. So, if you get the consistency of like, or the color of like Big Red chewing gum, then you have a really hot batch. And when I say hot batch, I mean it's a batch that's gonna go off really fast. So, and certainly on Kill Fill and a lot of these other quick jobs, a 3-day build, we wanna try and do everything as quick as possible. So a hotter batch of Bondo is always a good idea in these types of projects. So now what I have to figure out is how to retrofit this handle back onto the frame that I made out of the core of Sintra. I really like the wood grain in this. It'd be hard to reproduce it and harder to fill with Bondo or something. So I want to make sure I cut really nice tight lines, and that way this thing should just screw back on. I usually prefer a mechanical fitting to just glue, which means putting a screw or some sort of hardware in there on top of the glue. So the next thing I think I'm going to do is lay it out on the gun. Again, kind of get one side matched, and then or get one side cut, and then come back and match the other side to it and see how tight I can get it. For the little pieces on the side, mainly what I did was put in just these little handmade bits and pieces. Drilled some holes in them, cut some angles. I think more importantly, it was nice to show screw heads and places where this thing bolts together. This was a piece that I just made out of Sintra, capped with a piece of PVC pipe. Right here, I'm just capping it to put an end on it, just to kind of fill it out. This type of stuff, it's almost better to, as opposed to mocking it up, to really just build the piece, start sticking it on, sanding it, pull it back off, measure it, sand again, and then that way it all fits custom. No matter how much you lay stuff out on a table or in a drawing, it doesn't always fit in the real world. So from here, I'll just pop off the little foam core boxes that I made and just throw those away. Peel the molds back very carefully, make sure we don't snag it. Sometimes you need to do a little bit of trimming where it slips under the mold. I tend to use baby powder as opposed to general mold release, so it won't be sticky when it comes out of the mold. Again, this is just 2-part urethane, fast cast. Very carefully pour it in, try to avoid air bubbles. Give it about 20-30 minutes and demold from there. When I painted this, obviously you always want to use a primer. One, because it helps the paint sit better, but it also unifies all the colors. What I used on this was actually just a hammered metal black, which gives it like a cool kind of beat up metal look as opposed to just a nice glossy finish. Gives it a kind of a hand hammered look. Okay, so final day of the build. It's all put together and painted. As far as the process, I cut these strips up myself to match the fins on the front of the gun. Added a couple of extra screws, one just for stability's sake, and then two just to kind of add a little bit more detail to the gun. I always find that it looks a little more realistic the more stuff that's there. And asymmetry itself is kind of, it looks more realistic. A lot of these parts that are on here now, like this one for instance, this is just like kit bashing. This just came from a model kit. This is the hammer from the original airsoft gun. My kit parts you saw me pour the mold and the cast pieces for earlier. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a process called dry brushing. In this case, I'm just going to use some chrome spray paint. You get a little bit of the paint on the brush, get most of it off to where your brush is just about dry, and then you just kind of dust it over the top of it. Gives you some kind of low level, natural looking highlights. And you really just want to hit the high points, because that would be the area that's most scratched up, most exposed to the elements. And as your brush gets drier, you can actually rub a little bit harder, kind of give it a little bit of a shine. Get the trigger worn out a little bit more, so obviously that's getting the most use. What I did here from the start is actually painted with hammered spray paint, which gives it a nice kind of bubbled texture. It'll actually give you a really good hammered finish, and especially when you're doing a paint job like this, any bit of texture you can get, the better. You can see there, we get a little bit of movement in there as opposed to it just being flat and smooth. Makes it look a little bit more aged, a little more realistic. You see like old ammo cases and old guns have been banged around a lot, and you can see the paint's been chipped off. So the scope is meant to be like this long range, high-powered digital scope. So when you're a bounty hunter, you can get up close as you can to your bounty without getting too close and still be able to take them out. Once I've got all the dry brushing done, for the smooth stuff, I'm going to go in and brighten all the screws back up again. When you're dry brushing, you want to be careful because the paint itself, since it is wet paint going back on top of your paint, it'll kind of reactivate the paint underneath it. So it tends to make it a little bit sticky. You can easily leave fingerprints in your finished paint job. So luckily, in this case, it's meant to be beat up, kind of old and distressed, so it kind of works in our favor this time around. Now just for a finishing touch, we've got a little bit of flat black. We go right around the tip, just to basically kind of give it a little bit of a powder burn. Looks like it's been fired quite a few times. And I think that's about it.
may I do the honors?
Sure, go for it.
Wow. X. Wow, Jesse, this looks amazing.
Thank you.
It is really the most Western sci-fi gun I've seen.
Absolutely,
Right?
and there's a bit of like steampunk to it, which I
Yeah,
really like
Steampunk is
about
your
it.
specialty, right?
Exactly. Which I really like about it is just the fact that it does have that old Wild West feel to it, but it still has that kind of cyber feel.
Yeah.
All right, well, can you show me the ins and outs? Like, how do I...
Yeah, we got a park next door here behind the shop. I think you can take it over there and fire off a few shots.
All right, well, you guys ready? I'm excited. Let's go to the park.
All right. There's a bottle.
See
200
it.
yards out, 2 degrees,
Yards out.
1 click.
2 degrees. Copy that.
Damn, almost.
Close, close. Try it again. See anything?
I see a guy playing football.
Yeah. Hit the football. 250 yards, 2.5 clicks.
Hey man, forget that, my football, yo!
He just put the ball. Squirrel!
On the fence, on the fence.
Are you getting the sound with the Boba Fett block?
Did I just kill Phil?
Worst death scene ever.
Get your film fix. Subscribe to Cinefix.